Thank you, Claire. Genre fiction has always told stories about disability. Literary genres present and represent characteristic disability tropes and narratives, such as the disabled horror monster, the romance hero cured by the love of a good woman, and the cognitively exceptional detective. These images reflect disability images and stereotypes circulating in wider culture, but they're also refracted by the demands of the genres in which they are situated. As Atu Keeson observes, generic conventions serve to situate the disabled characters differently from genre to genre. Genre affects how disabled characters are depicted and how those depictions are interpreted. Despite the manifest importance of genre to disability representation, it's only fairly recently that cultural disability scholars have begun seriously to consider genre fiction. Claire Barker notes the limited literary range of scholarly work on disability representation and the ways in which such works have tended to overlook factors such as genre. Scholars have examined disability in works of genre fiction, but such works have rarely been read as genre fictions. Contemporary genre fiction operates within a complex and shifting network of rules, conventions, tropes and motifs, including those directly affecting the depiction of disability. Today I'll argue that the intersection of disability and genre can encourage readers to think differently about disability. The conventions of individual genres enable particular types of disability narrative, and while some of these genre-shaped stories of disability shore up dominant discourses, others challenge them. And while today I'm only going to discuss a single text, I'd argue that all genre fictions have this potential to encourage readerly reflection on disability. Abigail Paget's Strawberyl, a crime novel published in 1994, is part of a long-standing crime fiction tradition, the disabled detective story. In particular, Paget's novel, whose investigator protagonist has bipolar disorder, prefigures a boom in crime fictions with neurodiverse or cognitively exceptional investigators that began in the late 1990s and continues to the present day. In such texts, disability is called into service partly as a shortcut to the creation of a memorable protagonist. However, the upsurge in neurodiverse detectives also arises from their status as a compelling variation upon a core genre convention, the detective protagonist with an unusual or exceptional mind. In Strawberyl, San Diego Child Protective Services investigator Bo Bradley is assigned the case of the Frainer family. 3-year-old Samantha Frainer has been raped and dies of her injuries. Her mother's suicide quickly follows. Bo must work against the bureaucracy she represents to protect Samantha's emotionally fragile older sister Hannah, including preventing Hannah's father figure Paul Massieu from being wrongly convicted of the crime. Because of her bipolar disorder, Bo has an intense sensitivity to subtlety and detail. She is highly attuned to, quote, the little twitches that hide lies, mass deception. She is therefore almost always able to tell when someone is lying. And having spoken to Paul, Bo is convinced of his innocence. So while the police focus on finding evidence that will convict him, Bo investigates other possibilities. Like the neurotext discussed by Stuart Murray, Bo is, quote, a productive detective because of, not in spite of, her different brain. Bo's condition is positioned not as a burden, obstacle or impediment as per dominant cultural discourses, but as something that actually enhances her investigatory skills. And while the larger tradition of crime fiction with disabled protagonists is not unproblematic, it is nonetheless significant for a number of reasons. The genre's narrative pattern of crime, investigation, resolution means that the reader both anticipates and encounters the detective's success. Disabled people are positioned by default as successful achievers and as contributing to the social good. Such fictions also locate disabled people as active agents. Genre convention requires that the fictional detective be a person with agency, acting to gather clues, analyse them and solve the crime. These works therefore directly contradict dominant perceptions of disabled people as lacking in agency. Strawberyl also foregrounds and problematises a representational trope that appears in a variety of cultural forms, but is mobilised particularly often in crime fiction, the mentally ill criminal or perpetrator. Such depictions shore up associations between mental illness and violence or criminality. Either the perpetrator of awful acts is positioned as a psychopath or crazy by default, or mental illness is viewed as in itself sufficient explanation for criminal activity. Investigating the daycare centre Samantha attended, Bo meets Zolar, a young man with schizophrenia. Because of her own experiences of the psychiatric system, Bo is able to connect with Zolar, who leads her to crucial evidence. She is painfully aware, though, that if she tells the police, Zolar will be scapegoated. She knows the police will interpret his schizophrenia as evidence of wrongdoing. This is a quote. Everybody would recall that mentally ill people are universally prone to unspeakable crimes, overlooking the fact that mentally ill people are almost invariably victims, not perpetrators. Bo eventually does tell the police, but it's only the fact that a neighbour is able to provide an alibi that saves Zolar. Paget calls into question the association of mental illness with criminal deviance and highlights the ways in which genre conventions might be culpable in reinforcing stigmatising beliefs. Bo herself is initially afraid of Zolar, wondering if he is, quote, the stock lunatic of countless horror stories, lurking in shadows like a half-remembered nightmare. Now, the stock lunatic is equally a convention of crime fiction, but one that the novel decisively rejects. Zolar is harmless, and the fact that he provides crucial information about the case aligns him with the investigators, not the perpetrators of crime. The novel then refutes the association between mental health conditions and criminal acts. Also relevant is the depiction of Paul Massieu. Paul is the prime suspect not only because he was Hannah's mother's boyfriend, but because he had what he believes to have been an alien abduction experience. The same flawed inferential chain that interprets Zolar's schizophrenia as evidence of guilt also applies to Paul. Paul's beliefs are taken as evidence that he is mentally ill. He's described as wacko and crazy, which is in turn understood as proof of wrongdoing. On pain of being fired, Bo is forced to testify in court that her department believes Paul is a danger to children. She does so, but arranges with Paul's lawyer to reveal her psychiatric history on the stand, assuming her testimony will be dismissed as unreliable. Bo's scheme fails, but she finds the experience of publicly claiming her disability identity immensely empowering. Symbolically, it's not just Bo, but all people with psychiatric disabilities who are on trial, and the judge's verdict that Bo appears perfectly competent is an implied vindication of the larger group. In its final pages, the novel shifts focus to look at how disabled bodies, rather than minds, are conventionally interpreted and represented. As Leonard J. Davis writes, literary villains tend to be physically abnormal, scarred, deformed, or mutilated. And this representative tradition, again, is mobilised particularly often in crime fiction. Paul has a badly scarred hand and is missing a finger, something that gives him a, quote, sinister quality. In court, though, new evidence in the form of a video on the attack of Samantha is shown, and the man's face is not visible, but his hands are. And as a video still of the perpetrator's undamaged hands is displayed in the courtroom, Paul holds up his hands so that everyone can see, quote, the right one scarred and bent, missing its little finger. Paul's disfigured hand might conventionally signify guilt, but in the courtroom it's incontrovertible proof of his innocence. So in Strawberyl, external form does not signify inner character, and the association of mental illness with criminality is decisively rejected. This exploration of the way in which disability is commonly misinterpreted is enabled by the genre's intense focus on processes of deduction and interpretation. In crime, objects and appearances are always potential or actual signifiers of something other than themselves, clues which can be decoded to reveal the guilt or innocence of the characters. The genre is thus ideally suited to problematising how we read and misread disabled bodies and minds in the wider world. As Heta Puranen writes, a genre functions as a norm or exploration guiding writers in their work and readers in their encounter with texts. I suggest that genre norms are not inherently limiting or oppressive, and that authors can work with as well as against those norms to subvert dominant perceptions of disability. Robert Edelston observes that genre fiction is always limited fiction, quote, shaped by its own self-chosen restrictions. The paradox of genre fiction is that it is these very restrictions, the web of conventions and associations that adhere to particular genre traditions, that enable narratives not found elsewhere. The vindication of Paul Massieu and Zolar in Strawberyl is effective precisely because it occurs in the context of a genre where disability has conventionally suggested villainy. And that convention is undoubtedly problematic, but it's the existence of these problematic conventions that can open up a space in which readers' expectations and beliefs about disability can be challenged. Like literary disability studies, genre fiction studies has had to fight for recognition from a literary critical establishment that perceives its subject matter as marginal and niche. The textual bodies of genre fiction are frequently devalued, with genre fiction positioned as fiction which is functionally impaired in comparison to literary or mainstream fiction. Insights from disability studies remind us, though, that notions of normal function are always constructed and contingent, and that what the wider world perceives as restricting or limiting can be a source of new insights and potentials. Simultaneously abnormal and normative, genre fiction allows for the resituation of disability, even as a disability-informed approach opens up new ways of thinking about genre. Thank you.